It worked. I took the prompt. So the inferiority complex, again, a common phrase that we use in it's in our language. It's part of what we say every day. This is where it started. Adler's the one who coined it. These kinds of things are pretty common, and again, part of the language. Now, he also suggested we could have a superiority complex. And for him, a superiority complex is a person who's rather low on social interest. These are people who think that they're better than the rest of us. These are people who will not be as concerned with their fellow human beings, their fellow citizens, their perhaps their place in a society. There are all sorts of things that you could do to help make your community a better place, but you don't bother to do it, okay? This would be a person who's low in social interest, and for Adler, he called this a superiority complex. These kind of things have been in the news lately, so this one's kind of worth knowing a little bit more about. It'll put things in more of a good perspective, if you will. Bottom line for Adler is that he said, we are driven. There's all sorts of drives that we have. And they're just not, there's very few of them based on sex. You have a sex drive. That's, and people have varying degrees of it. And it's something that's obviously very adjustable, if you will, according to the environment perhaps that you grew up in. That's a very deep and long subject. We could fill a whole term with nothing but that. But there is a sex drive. But for Adler, for Jung, and for just about all the other theorists who have come after Freud, that's not the only thing. Even if they think it's the most important thing, it's not the only thing, like Freud said. One more thing that Adler talked about, which is kind of interesting, however, it hasn't held up real well to testing, but it sure sounds intuitive. And so a lot of people still put a lot of stock into it, so it's worth kind of talking about a little bit. And that's birth order. Adler suggested that there were certain characteristics that people developed depending on where they were, the order in which they were born into families. Now, big families were much more common back in those days throughout societies, in every country. The infant mortality rate was still very high. It was estimated in the year 1900 in America, it was a huge number, something like 40% of all children didn't make it to the age of 6. So yeah, there was certainly a lot of reasons to have more children if you were trying to, and there was so much land here that we were trying to fill it out. Certain religions do discourage birth control. So those kinds of things, that the birth order became something that was maybe even easier to study. We do average much smaller families in America today, but the birth order roughly looked at things like the firstborn, that Adler said that they tend to be more achievement oriented and do achieve more. In fact, I remember seeing one study that showed that somewhere close to half of all American presidents were firstborns. And, so you've got some little evidence, correlational type stuff to suggest there's something to it, but the deep science didn't really hit it as, give us as much to it as Adler thought that would be there. Middle children are supposed to be more artistic. The youngest children tend to be a little bit more indulged and all that. And some of you, if some of you are from larger families, or even heck, if you're from a family of 2, there's a birth order there. And you may have noticed that there's certain differences between you and your sibling or siblings that kind of hold true, that sound like they fit into what Adler said about birth order. Again, it's kind of intuitive. It does seem to make some sense with that kind of stuff. I remember one of the things that Adler said is usually the firstborn gets the most attention. They're the ones that are going through each stage of childhood first. And by the time the second and third ones get there, it's like the parents have already been through that. They kind of know what to expect. They're not nearly as surprised or amazed or things like that. If you're not the firstborn, when you speak your first words, they're more like, oh, good. as opposed to the first one going, listen, he spoke his first words, and they get all excited. So there's a difference in the amount of attention you might get depending on where you came in on the birth order. I remember in my own case, I had an older sister who was 11 years older than me. We had a big gap between the two of us. And one day, just getting into stuff, I found her baby book. And I mean, it was really complete. They had run through, up into high school. There were all the milestones. And underneath it was mine. And after about 6 months, they stopped putting entries in. I go, they don't love me. Oh no, So yeah, there's a little difference in how you might get treated depending on your birth order. So I think it's kind of fun to talk about, if nothing else, even if it's not really scientific. We get a kick out of that now. All right, any questions on Adler? Those three, the three we just talked about, because of the timing of their existence, if you will, in terms of the history of psychology, you got Freud, you have Jung, you have Adler. They're considered to be the psychodynamic perspective of personality theories. Adler, not so much. I mean, Adler really broke away and did more non-psychodynamic. He definitely pushed a different envelope, and which there's a lot of good social psychology stuff in that. Again, that's our last chapter, so we'll talk more about that then. So those are the big three of the beginning. All right, so next we're going to move, without any questions, to the behavioral and social cognitive perspectives. Now, these are going to emphasize the environment. We're going to talk about behaviorism here. This is basically chapter 6. What we did in chapter 6, if you learn that very well, then you pretty much already know this. We're going to look, B.F. Skinner, he really was the 20th century name in behaviorism. He first made his name in the 30s, and he passed away in the 90s. He was like a major influence there for about 60 years. For him, your personality is what you see is what you get. That's it. It's all about what you can measure, you can observe, you can see. And everything that you are has been determined by your external environment. So if you grew up in a certain, when you think about it, you shared, a lot of you shared, if you lived in the same place all your life, you shared a lot of the school experiences with the people that you grew up with. It's an accident of geography. It all depended on where your parents lived when you were growing up, okay? All of but for Skinner, all the stuff that you are now is determined by the home you lived in, the schools you went to, the friends you had, the experiences. And sometimes, and life is, this is a good time to bring this up. You'll often hear people say, your life is determined by your choices. And there is truth to that, but it's not the absolute end all and be all of who you are, because chance happens. Anybody who's ever been in a wreck, especially one that you didn't cause, knows that chance happens sometimes, and that can change your life completely at times. So, there's a lot to be said about the times that you grow up in. Most of you don't have a high opinion of baby boomers, but you didn't grow up then, so you don't know what the environmental influences were like. We talk about the greatest generation, and we look at the environment that they grew up in, and before they had to go off and fight in World War II, they had to live through the Depression. One of the things I read one time that was kind of interesting is that one of the things we had was a very skinny Army and Navy, because they didn't eat very well in the 30s. They were just too poor. And so there just wasn't a lot of obesity in those days, because there wasn't a lot of food to be eaten, especially in excess. So, it's when you think about the environment that you're raised in, it also has to do with when the time of history that you grow up in. None of us chooses what history that we go through, and all of that is chance. So now, yeah, I'm not knocking choices. We can certainly make some bad ones and some good ones that'll affect our lives. But sometimes we're in situations where chance happens. So that environment is still, either way, your choices or your chances are going to develop you into your personality. Okay. There's another way to look at this, and this was somebody probably in here has read some Kurt Vonnegut. He had a really interesting statement in one of his novels. It said, "You are who you appear to be." But there's also another little proviso to this. Do you act the same way in a classroom that you do when you're at home? Which one is the real you? How about both of them? How about that we're just a little more multifaceted than the kind of person we put on depending on the environment we're in. The environment can have a lot to do with your behavior. When I'm in a therapy session, it's rare for me to talk this much. And it's only when somebody says, I need you to teach me about something, like teach me how to quit smoking. Okay, boom. Then I kind of go into the teacher mode and we'll go into where I talk more. But normally in a therapy situation, I do a lot more listening. And so my personality is going to look different in that kind of situation. And then I get home with my own home life. I don't talk to y'all like I talk to Seamus, and I know you don't talk to your pets like you talk to most everybody else. At least I hope not. So when you do that, people are going to put their head down so you can pet them. Now, if you want to achieve change, which if you're a behavioral therapist, you would try to be affecting anyway, then you have to change your environment somehow. Oftentimes when I'm talking to somebody about quitting smoking or drinking or something like that, and we don't want to start with a cold turkey, I'm going to tell them to change the environment. That if you're a smoker and you want to quit smoking, you can no longer smoke in your house. I don't care what the weather is, you now have to go outside. Or maybe you can only smoke in your bathroom and you have to go in the bathroom, you have to close the door, and that's the only place you can smoke. You don't want it to be pleasant. In other words, you don't want to be as quiet as reinforcing. So you look for how to change the rewards that people get. You look at changing the environment. And according to Skinner, this is what you do to change personality. So any questions on Skinner and behaviorism before we jump to Bandura, back to the Bobo doll man? Everybody ready for that? Let's do it. We'll talk about Banduras. Social cognitive theory. Now for Bandura, the environment is still important. It is a part of what we exist in. There's no getting away from the fact that no matter where you go, you're in some kind of environment. And those factors can be very important. It's like the environment of me teaching from home over Zoom. When I'm on a campus, if I'm there in the classroom with you, your behaviors are different and my behaviors are different. I can get much more interaction. I have a lot more conversation because it's possible. I understand we've just got a different environment that we got to work with the best we can in this type of situation. But there's the cognitive factors are equally important. Okay. How many of you have been struck by the fact that sometimes a person goes into a situation with optimism and is able to achieve more, as opposed to a person who might be more of a pessimist, and therefore they don't achieve as much. Maybe that the way they approach the environment can have a lot to do with the outcome, can have a lot to do with their personality. If you go into a class expecting not to do well, there's probably a higher than average chance that you're not going to do well. But if you do go in there with more confidence, depending, it shouldn't be overconfidence. You shouldn't have more confidence in your abilities than actually exist. But if you walk into that classroom saying, I got a chance to do something really good in here, and you've got a different cognitions set going on, now you've got a chance to do perhaps better than how you're going to accomplish something. Sometimes you can go in pessimistic and get surprised. You never know. But there's always exceptions to the rule here. But for Bandura, the cognitive set that you walk into can have a lot to do with who your personality is and how you act in situations. You can develop, and you can develop a lot of stuff from observational learning. The the I've never been trained as a teacher. I'm sure most of you can tell that, right? But what I did, the way that I do teach was based on the best role models I had while I was in college. I think that most of you will find that college teachers you're going to run into are going to be either often are better or worse than what you had growing up in your grade schools, whether it's public school or private school. There's most of those teachers had to go to college to learn to be teachers. Most of the teachers who teach in college did not. They are teaching because they learn the material that they're teaching. They went through college to learn it. They go through the advanced degrees. They get to a point where now they can walk into a classroom and they have the knowledge. But in terms of like a teaching skills, most of us just make it up as we go along. We get, I have worked off the feedback that I've gotten over the years. Everybody's always told me, yeah, you get off the topic. Yeah, I know that I can't seem to stop, but I am better at getting back to it than I used to be. So what you're looking at here is an environment that I had to think about. I mean, classrooms are classrooms no matter what, but I had to decide what works for me, what works for my students, and go from there. My grading system, for instance, you don't see that anywhere else, but I learned that by observing other people's grading systems and adopting that. So that is a big part of what we do. When you get out and start working in your externship, you're going to have a number of role models there. It's good to pick the best ones. Don't pick the ones that are getting away with stuff. Don't pick the ones who learn how to get over. Those are not the ones that are going to help you get ahead in life or in your career or things like that. Pick the ones who are the most competent, the ones that do the best, that maybe get along the best with other people. Pick up the good stuff. Learn by observing. This is a big part of what Bandura said we can do. That's all a cognitive thing. There's choices that you do make there. Okay. He also said we can regulate and control our behaviors, which is not something that Freud said or even Skinner said. But we can do it by just thinking through things. What I just talked about, when you go into your externship and you start seeing other people do things and you can think through that person really knows how to go about their business. I need to make sure that I learn some stuff from them. You're not going to be exactly like them, but you can develop your own style with practice by observing and using the information you get from other people, sometimes by flat out copying it. If that's what works, go for it. Another thing that the Bandura said, which is not something that Skinner was necessarily an advocate of, is that we can delay gratification. Skinner talked all about how you get a reward, and the closer it is to the behavior, that's what's going to determine future behaviors. Bandura said no. Bandura said we can delay gratification. We can, go to school for 18 months and go through this really intense program. It's like graduate school. And by delaying that gratification of what it's going to be like to be out there working with the animals, we're going to be better at it. We have a chance to have a license and really have a solid start to our careers. So Bandura is saying that you can make things up here and it can affect your behavior and your personality. You can make decisions that I don't have to get rewarded today, that I can put this off until I graduate. Okay, and here's another concept that he threw out. I've always hated this word, self-efficacy. I always want to say efficacy. This sounds like a chicken dish. Chicken efficacy. Too early? This is a belief that we can master our own environment. This actually kind of started with Adler, but Bandura pushed it even further. And by mastering an environment, we can produce desired goals. You're working on that right now. You're trying to master the environment that VTI offers. And by doing so, you're going to have a desired goal. You're going to be working with animals. You'll be a professional. And that's not a bad goal. Okay. So you can get a degree. You can quit a bad habit. No, nobody in here has bad habits, right? You're all very clean livers, and you have clean livers. Okay, right? Just check to see if everybody's awake.
Sure.
Yes.
Yep.
Hey, 3 might be a record on Tuesday morning. So, but you can also, another thing that you can have as a desired goal is you can succeed in a job, a career, or a calling. Y'all know what to do. Here's something, again, trivial information, but it's kind of fun to think about and to know. I got a head full of useless information. This is a good place to use it. There's 3 levels of work. You have a job, which is a place you go to make money. That's what you're doing. You're just there to make money. And most of the time, when you're very young and you're just, you're grabbing jobs to make some money, you're not really working on a career most of the time. All right. A number of you now, in many cases, if you have let's say you're going to school now and let's say you have a part-time job in a clinic, then you're beyond just a job, although it is a job because you just need money right now. But the next level up is a career, and a career is kind of a job that you put everything into. But the reason you put everything into it is to be the most successful that you can possibly be. This would be a situation where you want to make money, you want to get promotions, you want to get power. Maybe you want to rise to the top of your company. If you go to work for one of the big chains like a Banfield, that maybe you'll work up to, practice manager and things like that. And those are the important things to you. You're going to provide more for your family by doing so. But in the end, in a way, kind of what you're trying to do is how do I put this nicely? You're trying to bring a little bit of glory to yourself for your accomplishments within that job as a career. It's something that you put your life into, but that you're doing it mainly for the external rewards that you're going to get. And then the next level is a calling, and that's where you were called to do what you're doing. You're going to work with animals no matter what. You don't care what it pays. You don't care what kind of sacrifices you have to make, because the inner fulfillment that you get from a calling is beyond any amount of compensation, promotions, awards, or anything like that. None of those are nearly as important as really following your heart. The problem with callings is the people who do careers know they can take advantage of you and not pay you as much because you'll keep doing it anyway. It's one of the reasons teachers are so historically underpaid. Teaching is very addictive. It is a calling for people who love it. I mean, I love it, but I just only do it part-time because also doing therapy is a calling. So I've got 2 of them going for me, but I have to work 2 jobs too. What does that take? So, but callings are when you really follow your heart, and that's the 3rd level. But according to, and to bring this back to self-efficacy, is that this belief that you can succeed no matter what. Whether it's a job, you're going to do the job right. You're going to give your employer a real day's work for a day's pay. All right. If it's a career, you're going to succeed at that. And if it's your calling, by golly, you're going to make it the best you possibly can of it. So we can set those goals and achievement and achieve them. And and this is, and the one time, and I'll be talking about this next chapter, but this kind of thing, the low self-efficacy is something that often it's something that needs improvement in depressed people, because depressed people often have a very negative view of the world and themselves and the future, and that is something that will certainly impede your progress if you're trying to get anywhere in life. It's just you'll tell yourself you're a loser and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of cognitive things that I definitely work with as a therapist when it comes to this stuff. So that's something that that we'll talk about more in the next chapter when we get to abnormal. Any questions on that particular thing as I flip a page? Okay. Am I that clear this morning? I know better. All right, next little thing, concept we're going to talk about is called locus of control. In the social cognitive theory thing, there is a concept such as we call locus of control. And this can be either an internal locus of control or an external. Okay, internal versus external. Is something my responsibility or is it somebody else's responsibility? Now, sometimes it really is somebody else's responsibility and you got caught up. That becomes one of those chance things that happens to us. But a lot of times we look for, when we're working with doing rationalization to try and lower our anxiety, we try and figure out, maybe it wasn't my fault. Maybe this, somebody else should have done something. And if we overdo that, if we do that all the time where it's not my responsibility, then you don't have an internal locus of control, okay? And sometimes you got to look at things, whether it's from personal actions or purely random luck. Let's face it, luck happens. And sometimes it's even good luck. Most of the time it's not. For some reason, luck doesn't even out except for a few people that seem to always be lucky. I wonder if there's something cognitive going on with them. But there's only a very few people who are ever going to win the lottery for big money, but a whole lot of people keep trying. So in the end, that's just pure luck, whether it happens to you or not. And good luck with that. People with an internal locus of control, though, do tend to take more responsibility for their actions. They're the ones who will say, you know what, I really did mess up. And we don't have a very forgiving society. You do something bad and we tend to define you by it. One bad moment in your life and that's it. Which is really a horrible way for a country to operate. But you can overlook years and years of doing good by one bad thing. So that's how we define people. But even then, the people with an internal locus of control probably have a better chance to overcome that, simply because they will take responsibility and then do what it takes to make up for that somehow, one way or the other, just to correct things, do penance, however you want to think about that kind of thing. Now, the interesting thing about people with an external locus of control, they're more likely to be obedient to authority. Kind of an interesting concept. Anybody who's been in the military knows that you're required to be obedient to authority. That's the way the military works. There's a chain of command. And now you do have a legal obligation to disobey an illegal order, but sometimes that's a very hazy gray thing. It's very seldom that obvious that that's going to be the case. But people who have a tendency to obey authority, and if you remember, we talked in chapter 3 about authoritative versus authoritarian type parenting. People who grew up with that authoritarian parent are more likely to be that. They don't make the decisions, they are told what to do. And this is the kind of thing with an external locus of control. You want to be told what to do instead of taking the internal responsibility for things. So if you were paid to make your grades and then found that they kind of dropped when you quit making the grades, then what you need to do is look at how to make that an internal locus of control, to where when you make the good grades, you can pat yourself on the back and feel good about it. You don't need anybody else to tell you you did good because you made an A. You did it, you know it, and you're happy with that and you move on. Okay, so any questions on that? All right, let's talk about another topic that some people will like and some won't. Optimism. And this is something that I've kind of touched on in the first chapter, because I talked about an experiment that I participated in where we gave those people these tasks to do to see if they could become better at it or worse at it, if they were always failing or always succeeding or getting correct feedback. And this is what we're going to talk about, the original experiment by a guy named Seligman at Penn State, and it concerned learned helplessness. Y'all got a party going on there? All right, so learned helplessness is something that's related to positive functioning and adjustment. learned helplessness is something most of us have learned how to feel. Especially this last year, there have been a lot of people who have developed a sense of learned helplessness because we've been put into artificial situations. We've had to wear masks everywhere we go. We have to keep our distance from people. We're often not able to visit other people, relatives. It certainly probably has made dating one heck of a challenge. We've talked about that on a couple of occasions, how hard it would be to start dating during a pandemic. Oh my gosh. I'm glad I didn't have to worry about something like that at this point in time. But it's more common in situations like jobs that you get. The last job I had, that was a sense of learned helplessness. That was like, oh my God, it was just, this place was awful. I can't believe I have to go work there. And it really is one of the types of things that can produce depression. So it's a real important concept here. Now, the original experiment is something that I explained to you back in the first chapter. It took place with dogs. They were put in those boxes where they could be shocked. One group couldn't escape, the other group could. And then when they went to a third box where there was a new type of escape, the ones who had learned that they could not escape didn't even try in the second box. They had learned they were helpless. And when you get that kind of feeling, people who are in abusive situations, those are the kind of things where learned helplessness can really manifest themselves. They tend to believe that they're at fault for everything. There's a lot of depression involved with this, okay? Optimists tend to believe that bad stuff in their lives are caused by things that are external, that are unstable, and have specific causes. You know, I got in that wreck because I was late for an appointment, and that was my fault, but I was trying to just press my luck, and I went through a yellow light that was turning red and didn't realize that the car stopped on the other side of the intersection because I'm looking left and right. All right. So you're looking at these kinds of things. A pessimist is going to be just the opposite. It's my fault. I'm always like this, meaning it's stable, and just any cause can do it. It's not a specific moment of cause. It is that this is the way things always are. So if you hear yourself in that little description, here's some things that you can do cognitively. Start challenging those ideas. Okay, we'll talk about that one more in the next section. But we're going to be looking at how these kinds of thoughts can cause learned helplessness, cause depression, and how you can rework those thoughts into something more realistic. Okay. Now, here's some good news if you're an optimist. Optimists tend to be healthier, both physically and mentally. The trick is not to become unrealistic. You know, it's one of the things I'm always very careful about in my therapy is not to build false hopes, to turn a person into something or make them think they're something they're not. You know, you're not going to go out and conquer the world. That's not going to happen, but you might be able to conquer your little piece of the environment. So let's look at that. Let's keep it realistic. And that's a very important thing. I've told every person I've ever done therapy with, I have no cures, and I'm not here to raise false hopes. I'm here to work with what's really here within the limitations that we both have. So, but anybody can be an optimist with the right cognitions, okay? And it certainly will improve your life. Heck, we know that people who are depressed have lower immune systems. You can be physically healthier if you're not depressed. All right, so in this grouping here, what's the evaluations? How do people look at it? What is the overall consensus about it? Well, the strict behaviorism of Skinner, it ignores cognitions. If you remember, I told you in chapter 6 for Skinner, what you think doesn't matter. It comes afterwards. It's all about the observable, measurable behavior, the rewards, the consequences, things like that. So it's pretty limited there. But even when you add in the social cognitive stuff, it's really it tends to ignore biology. We're not looking at the genetics of what people are born with. And it tends to be too mechanical. There's a little bit of almost a recipe book to a lot of the therapies. I'm going to look up the recipes and see what we can do. Okay, any questions over this? We're going to switch gears into something completely different almost. All right. Then we're going to move to the humanistic. Wow. Seamus does a big stretch. Oh, that feels good. I can tell. Yeah, that's a good long one. Do one for me. That looks like fun. Okay. Humanistic perspectives. Yeah, everything we've talked about before now almost has been looking at the problems in people. What has gone wrong? Okay, that's what we keep looking at. The humanistic perspective is going to do something different. It's going to be looking at the capacity for growth. All right, this is a much more positive, if you will, approach to human beings, their personalities, their behaviors, things like that. And it stresses the ability we have to understand ourselves. All right. Y'all are quiet today, except for those of you in the classroom who were partying. First guy we're going to talk about here is a guy named Carl Rogers. Now, Rogers was one of those trained Freudians. And yes, ma'am.
You said it stresses the ability to what? I'm sorry.
For the humanistic, it stresses the capacity for growth and freedom. We're going to be looking more at free will in this. A lot of the what we've talked about so far, both the psychodynamic and the behavioral cognitive stuff, is more of the opposite of that. Okay. But now we're going to be looking at something more in really more optimistic, if you will. The idea that we can understand ourselves is kind of radical. And the first guy that really pushed this, that made a name for himself, this guy named Rogers, Carl Rogers. And one of the professors at SAM had gotten to meet him and talk to him. And he said he really was truly the nicest person he thinks he'd ever met. And God, I've been looking forever for a short clip of him in action. And you can tell this guy probably was about the nicest guy who ever lived. But he was trained as a Freudian. And so he was steeped in this whole thing about, you know, the libido and the id, ego, superego stuff. And he decided he had to reject that completely. It just didn't work for him. And he came up with some other ideas. It's kind of interesting. He actually developed a therapy that was not like Freudian stuff. And out of his therapy, he developed his theory of personality. It was kind of a reverse of the way most of these kinds of things happen. Most of these theories came about first and therapies followed. With Rogers, it was a flip. He did it differently. Okay. And Rogers, he suggests that the problems we have arise because we're taught the wrong things. You know, the whole idea that when we're born, we didn't come with a set of instructions. And those of you who have had children know that very well from the other direction, is that these kids didn't come with their own set of instructions, and every one of them is different. Then you'll know that, yeah, there's a high likelihood that you may have gotten taught the wrong thing. It's not going to fit your personality, your abilities. Oftentimes parents have certain expectations, things like you're going to follow in the family business or the family skill. And, you know, oftentimes you'll see, I was watching a home fixer-upper show just this weekend, and the dad has this kind of late in life little 4-year-old, I think 3-year-old, 4-year-old kid, probably about 3. And he takes him out on the job every now and then. They showed him taking a drill with a bit and screwing in a screw into a wall. Yay, great kid, you know, and think about the role modeling that's going on there. Here's what daddy does, you know, and so we get taught all these things. You know, I know my dad wanted me to be an engineer, and I could do math. I could have done engineering, but it's just not my personality. And luckily, he wasn't one of those real hard people that you know, was going to be completely disappointed if I didn't follow through on his dream. But no, he was fine with me going in this direction. But still, that was he kind of pushed that a little bit when I was young. So, you know, we can get taught the wrong things. And we get conditioned through criticism. I remember one of my dad's favorite sayings towards me was, when I couldn't find something or I'd forget something, because I'm ADD, they just didn't diagnose something like that back then. But Dad would always just say to me, son, you need to start using your head for something besides a hat rack. And I always told him, Dad, I don't even like hats. I don't wear hats. Still don't whenever I don't have to. But these kind of things, the criticisms that you get growing up can definitely lower your self-esteem. I mean, when you get told you're no good often enough by your caregivers, I think there's a chance you might start to believe it, right? You're no good at this stuff. You're never going to grow up to amount to be anything, son, daughter. Yeah, those kinds of things are going to be something that Rogers says is not a good idea to do to your children. He called them introjections of worth. So what that means is your worthiness is kind of based on the things that your parents told you, and they're going to interject some things in you that can affect you and your personality and who you grow up to be. All right. So Rogers said there's 3 concepts here that he wanted to work with towards personality. And the first one is the self, or a self-concept. And by this, and this is radically anti-Freudian, is that we are aware of ourselves. Freud said you're not. Freud said that 90% of you is in your unconscious. You're not aware of it, and you can't even become aware of it. Rogers said, no. You are wrong there, Mr. Freud. Now, Rogers was an American, and he wasn't in that Vienna circles, so it wasn't like he got kicked out of anything, but he certainly rejected Freud. He said we're aware of ourselves, and if it's an inaccurate awareness, then we're going to be messed up. We aren't, what we're usually not capable of doing if we're having lots of problems is we're not aware of our true selves. We're more aware of the selves we were told we are. And if you've been told you're no good, you're a failure, yada, yada, anything like that, that's going to be your awareness. And if that's your awareness, you're probably going to be having problems. You'll need somebody like me. Again, the way we get raised is job security for me, okay? And Rogers said there's 3 ways to help people, okay? And that's like, if you come to see me, this is what you'll get. And this first one's is another one of those phrases that's part of our language now. Unconditional positive regard. Also known as UPR, that's how we always shorthand it in the business. Unconditional positive regard means that no matter what you do, no matter who you are, I'm going to treat you like a human being that deserves respect. I think this is one of the reasons I was able to be a teacher in the prison. I got to teach, I taught for St. Houston in the prison system for a number of years. Really a great experience too. But, they're all convicted felons. I guarantee they're not all guilty. Our system really is geared to protect the rich and not the poor. But when they were in the classroom, I treated them like my college students. And I'll never forget one evening as, I would teach, there was night classes, I'd go for 3 hours. And one night at the 3-hour mark, they stood up to go back to their cells. And one of them said to the other, well, back to prison. It was like for those 3 hours, they were college students. And I think that I never had any trouble in my classes in all the years I taught there. And I think that was a big reason why. And I do this with my clients too. I'm like, my gosh, some of the stories I've heard, bottom line is being non-judgmental is what it really boils down to. If you can do that, you'd be surprised what you get out of other people. They will respond to you in a much more positive way, okay? And they'll be more open. If you're a therapist, they're going to be much more open to telling you what's going on. this is one of the great rapport builders in the early days, is to go in there with being non-judgmental, unconditional positive regard, and then just staying that way. No matter if you're working with a drug addict and they keep relapsing, if you don't get on them, if you don't get judgmental on them, you still got a chance to work with them, because you never know when an addict is going to get it and get sober. So that is a very important concept for Rogers. Another concept very important is empathy. Empathy is not the same thing as sympathy. Sympathy is where you kind of feel for somebody, but empathy is where you try and really feel what the person is feeling. Put yourself in their shoes. Now, you can never do that exactly. None of us can know exactly what's going on with any other human being at any time, even if you're a trained professional. You just can't do it, but you sure can get a good idea. And if you pay attention to it and respond to that, I mean, there've been situations I've been in where I just was so touched by something that I had to tell them that, oh my gosh, you're getting to me with this, and not in a bad way. I don't want them to stop. I just want to let them know that I understand you really are, why you're struggling with this. There's been other times when I realized that what I was feeling, what they were telling me, was anger. And I would let them know that. I would honestly say that, I'm not going to tell you this as a judgmental thing, but as an honest response to what you're telling me, that kind of thing makes me angry. And I want you to know why, so that you can work with it and think about it. But when I put it like that, they understand that I'm not coming at them as an angry person. You got to stop that. That's more like, you probably need to think about this, because I think this is not working for you. If it's not working with me, think about how it's working with people who are ready to emotionally react to you. So that empathy is such a really important quality. You're going to be dealing with it a lot, because you're almost all of you, if you, it's got to be all of you. You're not a pet owner now, you will be again. You love animals, and you're going to be dealing with people who are going to be bringing in animals that are very hurt, and they're very sick, and maybe at the end of their lives too. And it's going to be a situation where, if you're empathetic towards that kind of pain, it's going to make you a better technician. You truly will be much better at your job if you can have that empathy. And as a person outside of your job too, same thing there. There's a lot of sadness you'll have to deal with in your job. And again, that's why I encourage you, find ways to take care of yourself outside the job. That's very important. Okay. And then one more thing is genuineness. And that's genuineness is, at least from the viewpoint of my therapy, is like, I'm going to be genuine with you. My reaction to you, that kind of thing would make me angry. If I could tell you that, I can be genuine with you, and I can communicate with you better. I can make you think, help you become more aware of who you are by giving you this honest feedback in an empathetic manner. Okay. I'm not doing it I'm not angry at you. I'm just telling you that response, I'm getting a feeling that makes me uncomfortable here. I want you to think about this. Maybe this is something you need to work on. So those are three things, three ways that you can help a person, is with those three things. I think one of the things that being a therapist has helped me is it really has helped me become less and less judgmental of people over the years, that I really can talk to people in all sorts of situations and think, this person went through a certain set of circumstances in their life that led them to this. I don't need to be judging them. I've got enough things I need to be judging myself on and changing. So, all right. Now, one of the concepts that Rogers hopes that people get to, what he called the fully functioning person. A fully functioning person for Rogers is somebody that's open to experience. That you keep an open mind. That bird I showed y'all yesterday with two heads. I had some people come up and come with a couple of alternatives. One of them is that it was an injury where, like with a window strike, perhaps it blew an air sac and something like that. That's not an eyeball in it. And then another one There were a couple of other theories. I sent those pictures off to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. I hope to get some feedback on just what it was we were looking at. But I've got to keep an open mind that maybe that wasn't a second head. Maybe it wasn't the congenital defect. You got to keep an open mind that, you know what, maybe you may not be right about everything. I know we want to be right. That's a natural situation. Yeah, I've had people tell me, you always want to be right. I said, well, don't you? Don't we always all want to be right? But you got to keep yourself open to experience, and the experience may teach you things that you may not have believed at first, and that life, that's called learning lessons, I guess, is another way. Another thing is to not be overly defensive. As an Irish person, I do have to work on this a lot. It's so easy to be defensive when you believe something and somebody challenges that belief. And you got to remember, a belief is just that. It's based on faith, but it may not be, and I'm not talking about religion here. I'm just talking about maybe a political philosophy, or maybe your view of a science. It may be that your belief is that Freud was right. And if you're just so totally convinced of that, it'd be hard to challenge somebody with all the reasons Freud might have been wrong. So if you're just overly defensive, you're never going to hear what might be things that you don't want to hear, but that might be right. So you can't be overly defensive about that stuff. And also that you remain aware of yourself and your world. You're not just living in a vacuum. You are a human being that's existing within a society. You exist within the VTI society. You exist within your family society, your city, your county, your state, your country, and on. So you need to be aware of those things, where you are, how you fit in, what you can do, what's possible, what you really probably don't want to do or can't do, and just let that go. So being aware of those things is for Rogers being a fully functioning person. Okay, so we're doing in this chapter. I'm gonna skip that stuff. It's a long chapter, isn't it? Okay. Yeah, but the next section is going to be more than 5 minutes worth, so I'm going to go ahead and stop her there and let you out about 5 minutes early if you haven't already left. So, okay, so any questions? Okay, Alex, I got you. All right, thank you much. Y'all too. Stay safe. As usual, because there's variants out there.